Hi, everybody. Happy Monday to you. Thank you so much for joining us for our legal roundtable, our nightly legal roundtable, unpacking the day's developments in the historic Ken Paxton impeachment trial. Want to introduce our two guests. Anyone who has kept up with any criminal matters in Travis County over the years knows these two esteemed guests. I want to bring in Gregg Cobb. He is a former Travis County prosecutor who now has a defense practice, and Amber Vazquez, who has handled a number of high-profile cases here in Travis County and really across Central Texas as a defense attorney as well. So thank you both for joining us. I think your mics are still muted, so we want to make sure we unmute. But thank you so much for being here. Gary, I want to start with you because today we have seen, unlike other days, we've seen a number of witnesses, beginning with testimony this morning from one of the whistleblowers, Mark Penley, but also testimony from Ken Paxton's former chief of staff, an employee of the Travis County District Attorney's Office. And as of just a few minutes ago, we were hearing from former Travis County District Attorney Margaret Moore. So Gary, as you step back and just assess the day's developments, what are your thoughts?
Well, so first of all, Tony, thanks for inviting me on. It's an honor to be here to comment on this. My thought is that today was an excellent day for the impeachment managers. You got to hear from someone in Missy, Cary, who was not someone who was involved in the lawsuit, is not a whistleblower, who seemed very loyal to Ken Paxton and tried to save him from himself. And I did not think that the defense did much with her on cross. So I thought it was an excellent day for the impeachment managers. And the late arriving testimony through Gregg Cox and former DA Margaret Moore, I thought was important in showing that they were not interested and did not think there was any evidence worthy of going forward with Nate Paul's complaints. And I thought all that was very important.
That it was his complaints have been described as ludicrous, conspiracy theory, crazy, I think was one of the descriptors. Amber, when we talk about Missy Cary, Ken Paxton's former chief of staff, the fact that she was not a whistleblower, she did not join that group, the FBI. She does not have a pending whistleblower lawsuit with Ken Paxton. How important is her testimony as someone who was separate and apart from the whistleblowers?
Very. Just like Gary said, witnesses are judged on their credibility, and credibility is a lot tied to what brought you there, motive for the person. And the defense, in Paxton's defense, definitely seems really focused on the motives of the whistleblowers and the people involved. And Cary was outside of that box. So I think Gary said it exactly right, in that they brought somebody with zero motive with some of the most explosive testimony. And that's that. I think they did some damage today.
Well, and if anything, judging by her own testimony, her motive at times was to protect Ken Paxton. And so I thought that was interesting, talking about taking this picture of a woman who was talking about him at Galaxy Cafe. I mean, she described, I won't recite all of it, but she described multiple ways that she tried to, in many ways, in her own testimony, save Ken Paxton from himself. I want to ask both of you this question. I was struck by the fact that Missy Cary said on the stand that she testified before a federal grand jury investigating Ken Paxton in 2021, so 2 years ago. Yet we know from our own reporting that some witnesses have recently testified before a federal grand jury investigating these allegations into Ken Paxton. So I just want to ask you both, Amber, I'll start with you. What could possibly be going on with this federal case, and why this grand jury testimony in 21 versus more recently that we know of? What's up with that?
Well, I've worked in federal court for years, and to say that they're thorough is an understatement. The feds, in my opinion, will take their time until they get it right. And if they have more questions to answer before they present that case, they will do so, because the federal government, when they prosecute cases, have a much stricter timeline than we do in state court. They have about 90 days under the federal statute to get to trial after a case is indicted. So they need to make sure that they have everything right before they go forward. So it's not unusual for them to come back and get more evidence that could be helpful.
But Gary, would it necessarily be the same grand jury, or how does that process work? And why would you have this, I guess the lapse in time, as Amber explained, is somewhat conceivable, but then would different grand juries be taking live testimony from different witnesses? How does that all work?
Well, it could have been an initial grand jury doing an investigation, and then that investigation may have stopped, and then another grand jury picked it up. But the point that Amber was making is absolutely true, which is at the federal level, they're dotting every I, they're crossing every T, and they're going back and checking the spelling on everything. So everything's being checked, every witness is being talked to, and deals are being made too. And that's one thing that you see often with the federal prosecutions. Lower level people are coming in and giving testimony. They're turning over on the bigger fish, so to speak. And because of that, these investigations can take years, where at the state level, they might take months. So you get a more thorough investigation. You get more people often caught up in it, because a lot of times you get federal crimes being committed by people who had no idea that they were committing a federal crime, because there's so many federal crimes that are potentially being committed.
So it's possible then that different grand juries have maybe heard different, grand juries have been used to elicit testimony from some of these folks, right, but that would not necessarily be the same grand jury should there be an indictment at some point in the future. Understood. Amber, I want to talk more about testimony this afternoon from Margaret Moore, from Gregg Cox, to the former district attorney, a former official in her administration, talking about, referring these complaints to the Attorney General's office that came essentially from Nate Paul, calling them ludicrous. Margaret Moore saying that she picked up the phone and called David Maxwell to say, I'm sending this complaint over. She said that she did that because she wanted him to know that she had good enough sense to know that this was nowhere bound. And yet we heard testimony from that was played actually from Ken Paxton's staff saying that the complaint that Margaret Moore's office appointed this special prosecutor. How sort of like crazy making is that? I mean, it seems like the truth is truly getting obscured in there somewhere.
Well, I think the people bringing the case made some good headway today by calling Margaret Moore, by calling Gregg Cox, because you're talking about an elected district attorney. You're talking about the first assistant in another newly elected district attorney's office. These are people with a lot of credibility. And, Ms. Moore led a division for the AG's office and, in her previous, before she was the DA. And so you've got people with a lot of support in law enforcement and the community that are coming out and using some really strong language. So I thought that was pretty, a good blow for the prosecution of Ken Paxton.
Cary, put us inside the mind of the jurors. I mean, obviously, we know that this is a very unique jury, elected senators. We know about the certain infusion of politics into all of this. Help put us in their mindset to the extent that you can. I know that you are an attorney, but you also know the political landscape quite well. What are they thinking as they sort of metabolize all of this, particularly the Republicans who may have some incentive to acquit Ken Paxton.
Yeah, and that's really the unfortunate part about this, is that it may come down to more of the politics of it than the actual evidence presented. And you see that a lot with questioning, especially by the defense attorney, Tony Busby, where there's this, I think, attempt to distract from the fact that this is not a criminal case. So much of the cross-examination is geared toward, you didn't charge him with this crime, he wasn't charged with that crime, you didn't investigate all these crimes. Well, this is not a criminal trial. This is a trial on whether he has violated the public trust, he being Ken Paxton, in the way he dealt with the Attorney General's office in the matters involving Nate Paul. And you cannot leave, and don't underestimate the value of personal relationships in this. For instance, Margaret Moore's friendship with Ken Paxton probably is what motivated her, instead of just dropping the case completely, contacting David Maxwell and saying, here, we're sending this back to you. That would not have ordinarily been done under any circumstances. But because she did not want to hurt her friend's feelings, she did that in this case. So look at the jurors in this case. These are not jurors that have gone through a voir dire like normal jurors. These are 30-something sitting senators who all have relationships with Ken Paxton, or maybe Angela Paxton, or maybe somebody else involved with this case. Because of those human relationships, it may matter more to them because of those relationships than the facts of the case.
Yeah, and Amber, so what do you do in a situation like that? If you are the prosecutors, how do you get over that hurdle, or can it even be gotten over?
If I was prosecuting this case, I would go very hard in exactly how Mr. Busby is doing it, and that this is personal, this is betrayal, this is a lot of the ways that Busby, I believe, has portrayed Penley, and some of the ones that have come out strong as basically a betrayer. I think that's the tact, because this is, as Gary said, this is political theater. This is not a criminal trial. These jurors have not been sworn in voir dire in the same way and vetted that.
And never would be, by the way, right?
Correct. That is not the way this procedure works. And therefore, it does absolutely have a political theater component to it, because you have all politicians as the jurors. So I would absolutely, if I was prosecuting this, take the tack that Busby is taking, and that this is a political witch hunt. This is betrayal. These are disgruntled folks. That is, I think that's the right tact.
So Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who of course is the presiding officer, announced this morning that he believes that the clock will be up probably as early as Thursday afternoon, possibly Friday morning, and that this case could go to the jury, later this week or at the end of the week. So I just want to ask you both, who do you, and Amber, I'll start with you. Who do you want to hear from, or what evidence do you want to see before the clock runs out?
I mean, I'd like to hear from Nate Paul personally. I don't think that would happen. I mean, I would also like to hear from the person alleged in the affair. Those are two big. I mean, Nate Paul has a reason to obviously not testify with a federal investigation. If I were his attorney, I would tell him not to. But the other woman involved in the Paxton affair probably doesn't have a Fifth Amendment issue.
Yeah, and I'm curious. Obviously there is, of course, a salacious value to it, but in a more legitimate way, why would you want to hear from her?
To verify Cary's testimony today. I mean, I think, like Gary said, that is their strongest horse right now, because she was not part of the whistleblower group, and she brings in just such a different level of credibility. And because, like you said, it was clear that she was trying to protect him. And so validating that testimony would really, I feel like, give them a boost.
How about you, Gary? Who do you
Well,
want to hear from, or what do you want to see in the next few
well,
days?
if I'm one of the 4.1 million voters who voted for Ken Paxton, I want to hear Ken Paxton take the stand and tell me if you believe you behaved in a proper way in keeping with the public trust of that office, tell me why under these circumstances you did what you did. And if there's a good reason, fine. If there's not a good reason, then we will pass judgment on that. But you should not be allowed to hide behind whatever you're hiding behind to avoid letting those voters know why you did what you did.
Amber Vazquez and Gary Cobb, thank you for spending your time and your evening with us. We really, really appreciate your insights and appreciate all of you joining us. Again, we will be here every night at 6:30 for our legal roundtable with different attorneys from Austin and the surrounding area, helping us break down this historic moment in Texas history. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks
Great.
again.
Thank you, Don.
Thanks for having us.